And I'd like to invite Professor Boaz Huss from Ben-Gurion University, who will lecture us on the marvelous bloom of the ancient tree, Buber's perception of Jewish mysticism and its legacy. Boaz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moshe. And okay, I would like to thank the organizers, and I would like to thank especially Neta for taking such good care of us. And I will start in a way my things will be related to the things that just finished with. We will go back to 1906 and to Martin's Buber first publication on Hasidism. So, in 1906, Martin Buber published his first book on Hasidism, The Tales of Rabbi Nachman. He introduced... He introduced the tales with a short essay entitled Jewish Mysticism, in which he stated, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav is perhaps the last Jewish mystic. He stands at the end of an unbroken tradition whose beginnings we do not know. For a long time, man sought to deny this tradition. Today, it can no longer be doubted. Still, it remains the marvelous bloom of an ancient tree. Its color strikes us as almost too dazzling. Its fragrance strikes us almost too luxuriant. Yet, it is one of the great manifestations of ecstatic wisdom. Buber's essay offered the first succinct formulation of the notion Jewish mysticism, which first appeared in the 19th century, and of the history and development of the assumed unbroken Jewish mystical tradition. As Ron Margolin observed, the main structure of Gershom Scholem's classic Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, published in 1941, follows the guidelines outlined in Buber's 1906 essay. Indeed, notwithstanding his criticism of Buber, Scholem recognized that, and I cite, Buber was the first Jewish thinker who saw in mysticism a basic feature and continuously operating tendency of Judaism. In today's lecture, I would like to discuss Buber's construction of Jewish mysticism as presented in his 1906 essay, and highlight the neo-romantic, Zionist, and Orientalist assumptions that underlie it. Following Margolin, I will show that Scholem's concept of Jewish mysticism was largely indebted to Buber, and that many of the basic assumptions that were presented in Buber's essay still today govern the way Kabbalah and Hasidism are perceived and studied in the academia. Before turning to Buber's perception of Jewish mysticism, I would like to say a few words about the genealogies of the terms mysticism and Jewish mysticism. The origin of the term mysticism is the Greek adjective mystikos, whose meaning is something secret. In medieval Christian theology, the adjective mystical was applied to Christological hermeneutics, to the secret of the Eucharist, and to contemplative knowledge of God. the noun mysticism that first appeared in the early modern period was gradually disconnected from its specific liturgical, hermeneutical, and Christological contexts. During the Enlightenment period, the term was used negatively to denote religious error and excessive enthusiasm, and was applied primarily to Christian sectarians. However, during the 19th century, a positive perception of mysticism emerged that regarded not as a form of error, but rather as an essential component of religion. Mysticism was defined by theologians, scholars, and philosophers such as Arthur Schopenhauer, William James, and Rufus Jones as a universal subjective experience or intimate consciousness of the divine presence, which constitutes the most acute, intense, and living stage of religion. Mysticism, according to this new definition, was perceived as liberating and vitalizing force within human societies. During the 19th and the late 19th and the early 20th century, this newly formulated concept of mysticism was applied to a variety of texts, ideas, and movements from diverse cultures, such as Sufism, Advaita Vedanta, Zen Buddhism, and Kabbalah. The term Jewish mysticism appeared for the first time in the writings of Christian theologians in the early 19th century, such as Franz Molitor and Johann Friedrich von Meyer. The term was adopted by some Jewish scholars of the 19th century Wissenschaft des Judentums. However, most of them used the term according to the negative meaning that was prevalent in the Enlightenment period. It was only in the early 20th century that mysticism, in its emerging positive meaning, became the major category for the description, interpretation, and research of Kabbalah and Hasidism. The person who contributed most to the proliferation of the new category, Jewish mysticism, at the time was Martin Buber. As I mentioned before, in 1906, Buber published his essay, Jewish Mysticism. In the essay, Buber adopted the new perception of mysticism as a universal, ecstatic religious experience of encounter with the transcendent reality, and described it as a lightning flash of ecstasy, a breaking forth of the limitless in the silent depths of the soul. Buber delineates in his essay the development and progression of what he describes as an unbroken Jewish mystical tradition. Jewish mysticism began, according to Buber, or was firstly expressed in the period of the Talmud, and developed in the Kabbalah of the Middle Ages. After the expulsion from Spain, a new era of Jewish mysticism began, inaugurated by the Messianic Kabbalah of Isaac Luria and developed by the Sabbatians. The collapse of Sabbatianism opened the way for Hasidism, which Buber described as the last and highest development of Jewish mysticism. However, in its later stages, Hasidism degenerated into desolate sectarianism. Maybe this description looks to you very familiar and self-evident, but it is the first time that this historical development was outlined in 1906 by Buber. As Paul Mendes-Flohr has shown in his study, Fin-de-siècle Orientalism, Buber's perception of Jewish mysticism reflects a neo-romantic enthusiasm from mysticism and Oriental religions that was popular during the turn of the century. Buber viewed Kabbalah and Hasidism as a Jewish expression of a universal mystical phenomenon that presents an alternative to the materialistic rationality of the Western bourgeois culture of his time. Buber's categorization of Kabbalah and Hasidism as mysticism was connected to his national ideology and Zionist commitment. In the essay, Buber presents Jewish mysticism as a major component of Jewish national culture. If then, he wrote, the strength of Jewish mysticism arose from an original characteristic of the people that produced it, so the later destiny of these people has also left its imprint on it. Buber, who regarded Jewish mysticism as expressing the hidden reality of the Jewish folk soul, adopted the perception of mysticism as a liberating social religious power that subverts religious petrified establishments. Buber juxtaposed Jewish mysticism to rabbinic Judaism and described Hasidism as a liberating movement that released the people from the yoke of the halakha. The teaching of the Baal Shem Tov soon found access to the people. The piety of these people was inclined from of old to mystical immediacy. It received the new message of an exalted expression as an exalted expression of itself. The proclamation of joy in God, after 1,000 years of a dominance of law that was poor in joy and hostile to it, acted like a liberation. The people up till then had acknowledged above them an aristocracy of Talmud scholars, alienated from life. Now the people, by a single blow, were liberated from this aristocracy. As Paul Mendes-Flohr has shown, Buber's perception of Jewish mysticism emerged in the context of late 19th and early 20th century Orientalist discourse. Buber's turn to the East and his interest in mysticism entailed a typical Orientalist ambivalence. In a paragraph that was omitted from later versions of the essay, Buber wrote that Kabbalistic works This is something that we cannot. Okay, thank you. So Buber turned to the East. Sorry, where was I? Yeah, Buber wrote that Kabbalistic works, such as the Zohar, elucidated both admiration and disgust. The Orientalist stance that glorifies the Oriental past while disparaging its present condition comes to the fore in Buber's claim that Rabbi Nachman was the last Jewish mystic and that later Hasidism generated into desolate, lightless sectarianism. By the way, also, both these passages were omitted from the later translations and versions of this essay. The notion of Jewish mysticism and many of Buber's assumptions concerning its nature and role in Jewish history were adopted by Gershom Scholem and became the guidelines of the academic research field of Jewish mysticism that he established. Scholem accepted Buber and other early 20th century scholars' identification of Kabbalah, Hasidism, and some other Jewish trends as the Jewish expression of the universal mystical phenomenon. Scholem followed Buber's framework of the historical development of Jewish mysticism, locating its first public manifestations in late antiquity and its last stage in Hasidism. Sholem shared with Buber the national Zionist perspective on Jewish mysticism and regarded Jewish mysticism as the vital national force that enabled Judaism's survival in the diaspora. Like Buber, Sholem juxtaposed Jewish mysticism to Jewish legalism and declared that the project of the academic study of Jewish mysticism was embedded in a Zionist perspective. And this is Sholem, right, saying in an interview. I wanted to enter the world of the Kabbalah via my thinking and belief in Zionism as a living thing, as the renewal of a people who had greatly degenerated. I was interested in the question, did the Judaism of Halakha have sufficient strength to persist and to exist? Was Halakha really possible without a mystical basis? Does it have a vitality of its own to persist without degeneration over a period of 2,000 years? And we all should say now, no. Like Buber, Sholem held an Orientalist ambivalent stance toward Jewish mysticism. Using the same expression that Buber used, Sholem wrote that if one turns to the writings of the great Kabbalist, one seldom fails to be torn between alternate admiration and disgust. While exalting the role of Kabbalah and Hasidism as historical phenomena, Sholem denied the significance and interest of contemporary forms of Kabbalah and Hasidism. He perceived Hasidism as the last stage of Jewish mysticism and claimed, similar to Buber, that contemporary Kabbalah became the esoteric wisdom of small groups of men out of touch with life and without any influence on it. Since the 1980s, many of Sholem's assumptions were criticized and revised, and new perspectives and directions of study were offered by new generations of scholars. Notwithstanding these new perspectives and directions of study, the academic field of Kabbalah studies is still based on the categorization of Kabbalah and Hasidism as Jewish mysticism and on the fundamental assumptions and perspectives which were first presented by Buber in his 1906 essay, Jewish Mysticism. I would like to conclude this short presentation with a call for reconsideration and problematization of these fundamental assumptions. As I suggested, the concept of Jewish mysticism and the academic research field dedicated to it were constructed in the early 20th century in the framework of Jewish neo-romantic, Orientalist, and Zionist perspectives. The different cultural framework from which we operate today enables and requires a critical examination of the very notion of Jewish mysticism and of the assumptions and discursive practices this term entails, which were formulated by Martin Buber in 1906 and elaborated and developed by Gershom Sholem and his followers. Thank you.